everyone. I am Surbhi. I'm a program manager at Google, and I'm very excited to kick us off today. Today, we have an awesome guest, Matt Abrahams. Matt Abrahams is a leading expert in communication with decades of experience as an educator, author, podcast, podcast host, and coach. He's a lecturer at Stanford University's Graduate School of Business, where he teaches popular classes in strategic communication and effective virtual presenting. I have firsthand experience of witnessing Matt's awesomeness as a Stanford lead student and have had the pleasure of working with him closely at the Me2We annual event at Stanford GSB campus, where Matt hosted one of its kind live podcast with all of the renowned Stanford faculty. Welcome, Matt. It's a pleasure to have you, and I'm thrilled to bring your great wisdom to our wonderful Google community.
Well, Surbi, thank you so much. What a kind introduction. And I'm excited to be back with you in front of all of these folks.
Awesome. So let's get started. Matt, for those who don't know, runs a very successful podcast which garners millions of views. It's called Think Fast, Talk Smart. The podcast offers a lot of great, insightful, tactical, and actionable tips on becoming a better communicator and how to do that spontaneously. So, we'll touch upon a lot of those topics, and I'm excited to hear them. So, Matt, to get us started, I think I'm a huge fan of your podcast myself, and you shared once a personal story on how your journey into spontaneous speaking was inspired from certain experiences from your childhood, and specifically your name, Matt Abrahams, which led you, your last name, which led you to be the one to be picked at school, to be the first one to speak. So I want you to tell us more about it and how that experience has shaped you and ignited your interest and expertise in this topic.
Yeah, so I have been focused on spontaneous speaking my entire life. With a last name that starts with AB, I always have gone first. You know how teachers, and I was a high school teacher, so when I say this, it's easier when you have all the students lined up by alphabetical last name. So I always knew where I sat in a classroom. I was always front row, front of the class. And whenever the teacher would ask for things to be done, I would often be picked on because I was in the front seat. So speaking spontaneously is something that I have always been doing. Not always well, but I've certainly been in the hot seat often. And this is something that happens to all of us. And it's always been on the top of my mind as I've studied communication, as I've hosted the podcast and talked about it. But about 8 or 9 years ago, the deans at the Stanford Business School came to me and said, "We have a problem we'd like your help solving. Our incredibly bright students who are very talented and know the answers to questions are having trouble answering in cold call situations." That's where the professor says, "What do you think?" And you have to respond on the spot. And they asked me if I could help develop some content to help our students do better in these circumstances. And that's really where I pulled my own childhood experience along with my academic background and experience together to help create content that all Stanford MBA students have the chance to go through early in their careers to help them feel better. And that content has now been codified into the new book I have coming out and some of the talks I've been doing on the podcast.
Well, we are very excited for your book. Matt's book, Think Faster, Talk Smarter: How to Speak Successfully When You're Put on the Spot, comes out later this week. Is it on the September 26th, if I'm not wrong?
That is correct.
Wonderful. So, for our viewers, please make sure to check it out and order it. All right. So, you talked about how you wrote this book with the context when professors reached out to you for students who may be nervous when they're asked to speak on the spot. I think this is very true in Google setup, where most communication happens in hallways. At Google, we have a concept of coffee catch ups, walking up to someone's desk to float an idea, get feedback, or one on ones and discussions, which may not be pre planned presentations, right? So, switching to some of that context, what is your advice on engaging your audience in such different setups where you may not have pre-planned content, but you're trying to essentially persuade others with to agree with your POV or to pitch an idea?
There's a lot in that question. So let me break it down into some different parts. So the reality is this: we are spontaneous speaking all the time. If anybody has ever been trained in communication, chances are it's focused on presenting or pitching or running a meeting. But most of our communication, professionally and personally, happens in the moment. So these circumstances you're describing are very common. And many of us feel that we could do better in these situations. So, in the moment, when you're in these situations, it's very important to understand what's needed and how best to respond. So, even though we're talking about communicating, speaking, listening is actually one of the most important first steps. You need to appreciate and understand where the person or people you're talking to are at relative to the topic you're interested in. So, we have to take time to listen and ask questions to clarify. We want to make sure that we respond appropriately. Now, when it comes to responding, I am a huge fan, and you know this, Serby, because you've been around me a little bit, of structure. Structure is so important when we communicate. If all we do is rattle off lists of information, that's very hard for people to process and for people to remember and act on. But if we can structure our responses, package them up in a way that's logical and connected, it can be a lot more valuable for the people we're speaking to and also helpful for us. So let me give you a very simple example, and I hope we can go deeper later. If you're trying to convince somebody to your point of view or to your way of suggesting we do things, you might leverage a structure called problem, solution, benefit. Many of us are familiar with this. If you've ever seen an advertisement, you know this structure. You start by talking about here's the problem or opportunity we're trying to address, here's how we do it, and then here's the benefit of doing so. So packaging up your comments or your information into this structure can be incredibly helpful. So we have to listen so we can target appropriately and then structure our messages.
That's a great advice. So, being better listeners, I think that's such a great tool and tip to have handy. And I love the problem, solution, and benefit framework into structure. Um, you also talk about, I think, in your book, a 6 step methodology on
Mhm.
spontaneous speaking. And I think that's where you also touch upon messaging and structure. Would you mind sharing a little bit more from the book about this 6 step methodology? And I'm just, not trying to give away a lot of the good tidbits
Oh,
from
no,
the book.
no, no. I'm
I
very
want people
happy.
to read it, but I would love for you to share that as well.
Oh, there's nothing secret here. In fact, I have a big thank you to all of you at Google. I did a talk about 8 years ago on this topic, and it was posted on YouTube. And thank you to all of you at Google. That talk did very well and was helpful to getting this information out to as many people as possible, which is really what motivates me to help people hone and develop their communication. So there's a 6 step process as I see it, a methodology to help all of us speak better. And this is going to take me a little bit to get through. So I'll try to be as efficient and concise as I can. The 6 steps divide into two major categories: mindset and messaging. When it comes to speaking better in the moment, we first have to manage our anxiety. Many of us get nervous in high stakes speaking situations, be they planned or spontaneous. So we have to focus on managing anxiety. And there are really two ways to do that: focus on both symptoms and sources. Symptoms are what we physiologically experience. Serby, what happens to you when you get nervous speaking in front of others? I know I blush and I start sweating and perspiring. What happens for you?
So I think I fumble a little bit, and
Mhm.
I think my expression changes. So if I do that today,
Sure.
you'll know what's happening.
Very common, very common. We might be very animated generally, but then when we're nervous, we get very restrictive in our demeanor. Absolutely. There are things we can do to manage symptoms. The single best thing you can do is take a deep belly breath. If you've ever done yoga or Tai Chi or Qigong, it's where you really fill your lower abdomen and just make sure that your exhale is longer than your inhale. And if you do that, that's a great first step. I talk about lots of other things. I actually wrote a previous book called Speaking Up Without Freaking Out, and it has 50 academically verified techniques that you can use to feel less nervous. So we have to deal with those symptoms, but we also have to deal with sources. And sources are the things that initiate and exacerbate our anxiety. And that's where the next steps come in. So the second step in the methodology is to remind ourselves that we do not need to be perfect. When we communicate in the moment, we want to do it right. And I'm here to tell everybody there is no right way to communicate. There's certainly better and worse ways, but there is no one right way. But we put tremendous pressure on ourselves to be perfect, to do it right. And the problem with this is it actually reduces the likelihood that we will do it well at all. I start all of my Stanford MBA classes on the very first day of class. One of the very first things I say is maximize mediocrity. And Serbi, you can only imagine my students' jaws drop. They're like, what? We've never been told to just be mediocre. But here's the rationale. When you're trying to get it right, part of your brain is focusing on judging and evaluating everything you're saying, which reduces your cognitive bandwidth to be focused on what you're saying. So, at the end of that first day of class, after explaining this to my students and doing some activities with them where they see it play out, I give them the full quote, which is maximize mediocrity to achieve greatness. So, if you just give yourself permission to just do what needs to be done in the moment, you actually free up bandwidth to do it really well. So the first real source of anxiety is our own getting in our way. So we need to turn down the volume. I'm not saying we should never judge or evaluate what we say. We absolutely should. But we can turn that volume down a little bit so we can be more present and focused on what we're saying. That leads us to step three, which is to look at the environment and the context. Many of us see spontaneous speaking as threatening and challenging. You know, when somebody says, I'd like to ask you a question, most of us are like, oh no, I have to defend myself. I have to protect my position. Instead of saying, this is an opportunity to learn from the person, to extend my ideas, to collaborate. So if we reframe these circumstances not as threat and challenge, but as opportunity, and I know people do challenge us. I'm not naive to that. But even when we're challenged, we can see that there's some opportunity. And that takes us to step four, which we've already talked about, which is listening. So before I can respond, I need to make sure I'm listening fully. Let me give you an example. Imagine, Serbi, you come out of a meeting we're both in, and you turn to me and say, hey, Matt, how'd you think that went? And I immediately hear, oh, she wants feedback. So I'm going to give you all this list of feedback. Here's what went wrong. Here's what we need to do better. But had I really listened, slowed down, I might have noticed that you came out of the back door of the conference room, not the front door that I left through. You're looking down as you're asking for that feedback. You're talking with less variation in your voice. Maybe what you really wanted in that moment was not feedback, but was support because you feel that meeting didn't go well. What did I do by not listening well? I just made you feel worse because I gave you all this list of things that could have been done or should have been done. So we have to listen. One of my colleagues at the business school, Collins Dobbs, has this great method for helping people with crucial, really important conversations. And he's allowed me to borrow it when it comes to listening. We need to do three things to listen better. We have to do pace, space, and grace. We have to slow down. We're all moving too fast. You have to slow down so you can listen. You have to give yourself space, sometimes physical space, so I can actually hear you. Maybe it's too noisy, but mental space. Allow myself to be present and really pay attention. And then finally, we have to give ourselves grace and permission, not just to hear what you say, but my intuition about what you say. So those are the first four steps: anxiety, remove perfection, see it as an opportunity, and listen. And then the last two are about messaging, structure, which we've already talked about. And then we have the final step, which is the F word of communication, not the naughty one, but focus. Many of us, when we speak spontaneously, take people on a journey of our discovery of what it is we want to say, and we say way too much. My mother has this saying. I know she did not create it, but it rings in my ears every time I speak. Tell me the time, don't build me the clock. Many of us are clock builders. We need to focus our messages, make it concise and clear, especially now that we're doing a lot virtually. Concision is critical. So I went on a long time there, Serbi. You set me up for a very long answer, but there's 6 steps. And if we practice those 6 steps, anybody can get better at their spontaneous speaking.
Now, that is wonderful. And you have given us a clear and concise picture into spontaneous speaking. And I think that's really the heart of the conversation today. So I appreciate you sharing that, Matt. Let's switch to some scenarios that our Googlers here get into situations often. You know, a lot of time our times in day-to-day work is spent in meetings, right? So I'm going to ask you some questions related to communication advice that we encounter almost every day. So let's say there is a scenario where I am in a meeting. How do I insert my point in a meeting when others are talking? And again, most meetings are like 25 to 30 minutes long, and there's multiple voices in the room, and everyone's trying to share their input. And there are scenarios where, you know, you feel the need to speak, but you just cannot find the opportunity. So, what is your advice on inserting my own point into a meeting when others are talking?
This is a really important question because many people come to me with exactly this issue. Maybe they're a little more introverted or reticent. Maybe they just take a little longer to formulate their thoughts. And then once they have the idea and the willingness to contribute, it's hard to get your information into the dynamic that's going on. So we need to wedge our communication in. And I think there are three ways to do this. First is to leverage paraphrasing. Paraphrasing to me is an amazingly useful tool for lots of communication. In this instance, what I mean by paraphrasing is where you extract some key idea that is being discussed. So if I'm in a meeting and we're talking about how we're going to implement a particular process, procedure, or product, and somebody brings up cost and they're talking about cost and the implications of it, I might simply say, cost is something that's important to me, or cost is something we should look at in this regard. So I'm highlighting the key topic that's being discussed, and I insert my point of view by highlighting it. So I'm validating that what we're talking about is a valid topic, and then I add my perspective. So you literally just speak up with the paraphrased idea. Another thing you can do is put forth a question. So if the conversation is going, you could say, I'm curious about how we're going to cover that cost. And all of a sudden, the floor and attention comes to you, and you can go deeper into your concern or into your question. So we have paraphrasing, questioning, and then finally, the third way is through emotion. So you could lead with emotion. You could say, I'm concerned about cost, or I'm excited about how well we're doing regarding cost. So you can start with an emotion. So three ways to insert your point of view: paraphrase, question, or lead with an emotion.
That's awesome. I'm going to remember that. Paraphrase, question, and motion. Definitely. That's great. Let's talk about a scenario. So I'm a program manager at Google, as you know, Matt. There are often scenarios where I'm the one who's driving the meeting, right? And in specific meetings where you're trying to build consensus, you want everyone's voices heard, right?
Mhm.
Um, so as the driver of the meeting, sometimes a challenge you face is that there are more louder voices in the room, or maybe extroverted voices, or people who are generally seniors, right? Whose uh, inputs are, I guess, perceived to be more important, and therefore others are not talking. So, as someone who's driving the meeting, what is your advice in terms of ensuring different voices are heard, and you can have an effective and good meeting?
So I'm going to answer this question in two parts. The first part, I want to talk about what we can do in advance of the actual meeting, and then I'd like to talk about what we can do in the moment as the meeting is going on. So in advance, I am a huge fan of setting expectations, and I believe the least utilized expectation setting tool that we all have is the calendar invite, the meeting invite. Most of us don't even spend time thinking. We just slap a name, we slap a time and a URL, and we're done. You can do a lot in your meeting invite to set expectations for how your meeting is going to go. You can put an agenda, you can put in ground rules and expectations, you can put in a question or a challenge that you want people thinking about. So you start the meeting with that. So there's a lot we can do to set expectations. And one of those expectations can be we need to hear from everyone, and everyone has a right to have their voice heard. So setting those expectations up front. Now, often in the role that you have, I know you're meeting with the same people over and over again. So you have an idea or sense of the people that tend to speak a lot or the people who tend to speak less. And you can do some pre-work where you go to those who talk a lot and you can say, hey, I love hearing your input and your insight. I'm hoping to hear from everybody though. You hold your conversation or your contribution until later in the meeting or after others have spoken? So it's direct feedback, but it's useful feedback. Similarly, you can go to people who tend not to speak up as much and you can say, I know you have valuable input. I'd love to hear it in the meeting. Maybe these people are shy or nervous, and maybe there are other ways that they can contribute. If it's a virtual meeting, maybe they can type it into the chat. Maybe they can share with a colleague who can then voice the opinion. But you want to include and invite those who tend to speak less. That's all the pre-work you do. Now, if you're in the moment and you're in the meeting and somebody is bloviating, they're just talking more than they should or need to, sometimes with malice, they just want to show they're smart or prevent others from talking, or sometimes they're just clueless. They're trying to figure out what they're saying. Here again is where I think that Swiss Army knife of paraphrasing can really help. So as somebody is talking, you can interrupt them, but highlight something of importance that they've said, and then pull it back to the where you want to go, or actually turn attention to somebody else. So imagine somebody is just going on and on about the nuance and details about the implementation plan. And as part of it, they talk about inventory. And you could simply say, that point about inventory is really important. In fact, I would love to ask Farah now to talk about her perspective on inventory. So do you see what I did there? Is I stopped the person from talking by highlighting something of value, and then I turn the attention either back to the agenda or I literally bring it to somebody else who I know has something to say on the topic and move forward that way. To me, that's the most polite way to stop somebody from talking. You got to do some pre-work so the problem doesn't actually arise if possible, and then you paraphrase if it happens in the moment.
That's awesome. I'm gonna use that and take care of it. So if my colleagues are watching,
If
watch
they get
out.
paraphrased, they need to know they were talking too much. I get it.
Yeah, I got hot new tips from Matt. Okay, great. So let's then talk about again spontaneous communication, right? And when you're talking, I think something that a lot of us encounter is this ability to use these filler words when you're, I guess,
Mm.
thinking, right? What do I need to say? And then you're using these or abrupt pauses. What's your advice in terms of reducing these number of filler words that people use?
So verbal graffiti, filler words, whatever you want to call them, can be very distracting. I had been of the mind that we should always try to reduce these. But I had a guest on my podcast, Think Fast, Talk Smart. Her name's Valerie Friedland. She's a professor of neurolinguistics. And she actually convinced me that these aren't that bad. They actually serve a purpose. Now, I'm not saying we don't still have to work on them, but let me give you two things that filler words do, which I found fascinating. Filler words hold the floor. And what I mean by that is if I still want to speak, but I need to formulate my thoughts or connect some ideas together, if I say or it signals to everybody I still want to speak. If I just stop talking, most people assume I'm done talking and they'll start speaking. So there's a purpose that it fills. She also shared with me that as young children, adults teach young kids important concepts by prefacing them with a filler word. So if you're teaching a child a new word or a new concept, you might say before it. And children learn that when they hear that disfluency, what follows it is important. So there's some purpose to these. And the goal is never to get rid of all of them because then you sound robotic. Most people have some filler words. The problem is when those filler words become distracting. The best way to manage filler words is to become aware that you are using them. And that's hard because a lot of us don't hear ourselves use filler words. So we need to rely on technology or other people. And there are tools and apps out there that can help. I will name two. There are many others. There's one called Like So. It's an app you put on your phone. There's one that actually integrates with Meet and other virtual tools called poised.com. That D at the end of poised is very important. Just type in poised without the D and you'll see why. But these are tools that can alert you to how many filler words you use. Similarly, you could join Toastmasters. I know across Google there are Toastmaster organizations. I used to be a Toastmaster who was part of a Google Toastmaster club. They, as part of Toastmasters, they actually have a role assigned in every meeting of somebody who notifies you when you use filler words. And while it can be annoying, it brings into consciousness that you're doing it, and you can begin to work on them. Now, if you have lots of trouble with filler words and awareness building isn't enough, there's a technique you can use. It's tricky though, and it takes practice, and it has to do with breathing. The filler words that bother us the most are the ones that come between sentences and phrases when we're not saying anything. Those are the ones that really stand out. You can eliminate or reduce those significantly if you train yourself to be out of breath at the end of your sentences. I am trying to demonstrate that right now. So at the end of each of my sentences, I'm out of breath, which means I have to inhale before I can say anything else. You cannot say or while inhaling. In fact, you cannot say anything while inhaling. Speaking is an exit only event. You have to push air out to speak. So if I train myself to be out of breath at the end of all of my sentences, I have to inhale before I can speak. I not only get rid of filler words, I pause, and pauses are very useful. But we have to practice this. And the best way to practice this is to read out loud. So as you're reading out loud, practice ending your sentences or phrases out of breath. When you see the punctuation at the end of the sentence, simply land it and be out of breath and then start the next. And the reason reading out loud helps so much is you don't have to think about the words, so you can actually focus on the breathing. So filler words are a problem, perhaps not as bad of a problem as I once thought they were. And we can, but through awareness building and working on breathing, we can reduce many of them.
Nice. Okay. Well, you talked about tools, technologies, and also reading out loud practice and platforms like Toastmasters. So that's awesome. I guess talking to tools, then, generative AI is a hot
Mm.
buzzword everywhere, including at Google, right? We have teams that are working on a lot of exciting and secret stuff on that. So I guess, question to you, how do you think generative AI can help our communication?
Yeah, well, I'm a big Bard user, so I know a little bit about what you all are doing. So I think generative AI is something all of us who study and teach communication have to figure out how to integrate positively. I think all of us can benefit. Let me give you a few ways that I think generative AI can be very helpful to us. If I'm preparing for some kind of communication where I'm going to take questions, think of a job interview. I can go in to a tool like Bard or other generative AI tools, and I can type in interviewing for this role at this company, generate 5 or 6 reasonable questions, and then I can practice. Now, I'm all about spontaneous speaking, but some of the best ways to get good at spontaneous speaking is to prepare. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, but if you think about athletes or jazz musicians, they practice and prepare to be spontaneous in the moment when they do their sport or play their music. And we can do the same. And generative AI is a great practicing tool. Another purpose of or way we can use generative AI is to help us be more concise and clear. I can write a document or speak a document and have the words transcribed. I can put them into generative AI and ask it to make it more concise and clear, reduce the number of words or focus on a particular topic. And what's important is not the output, but it's taking the time to look at what the tool did. How did the tool make it more concise and precise? What did it prioritize? And that's a way of training our brains to do that ourselves in the moment. So I see generative AI as being really helpful for communication. Certainly, as a teacher, I have some concerns about my students' work being original or not, but I do think we can use it to help us be better spontaneous speakers.
That's awesome. And glad to hear that you are a Bard user and you did not mention any of our competitors' names. So you know what I'm talking about.
I have lots of friends who work at Google, and I've been an early adopter of Bard for sure.
Yeah, but I should be clear, I wasn't paid to pitch Bard here.
Yes.
Okay.
Nor was I.
Awesome. So I'm actually noticing as we're talking that you use your hands wonderfully to make your point, right? And it just comes so naturally to you. I've seen your on-stage presence as well. I would love your advice, and tell our Google community what's your advice on using hands effectively when you present.
Yes, I get this question a lot. So let me give you a few rules for gestures and then I'll explain some ways we can practice. So, gesturing is normal and natural in most communication. We gesture. And in fact, there's some really interesting research that says when we gesture, it engages our audience more because there's more for them to pay attention to. Human beings are very visual. And when we see things moving, we pay attention to them. And also, it offloads some of our cognitive burden. When we as speakers gesture, it reduces some of our cognitive load. It helps us describe things. So we want to be gesturing. When we gesture, we want to make sure that our gestures are big. Many of us, when we gesture, if we do it at all, we do it in a tight, close way, and we look defensive or like a dinosaur, even. So I have one simple rule for gesturing: gesture beyond your shoulders. You don't have to be I'm king or queen of the world, but just gesture beyond your shoulders. And what that does is it helps you to be engaging and open for your audience. How does this look? You tell me. If I said Google has a very open and embracing culture, or Google has a very open and embracing culture, do you feel the difference? All I did was go beyond my shoulders. So when we gesture beyond our shoulders. And when we're not gesturing, we keep our hands in plain sight. Many of us put our hands in our pocket or behind our backs or under the table. Or worse, we do what I call a fig leaf. That is where we cover up below our belt. And it makes us just look uncomfortable and not confident. So take your hands when you're standing, put them right at your abdomen, your belly button, palm on palm. You can interlace your fingers. You can even do a steeple. Just everything is loose and light right at your belly button. If you're virtual, you want to make sure your gestures are, when you make them, they're at your shoulder level. Now, in person, if we were on a stage in a room together and I gestured like this, I would look a little weird. But virtually, you can see my gestures fit very nicely, but my thumbs are at my shoulder height. So there are lots of things we can do in terms of gesturing to help us and our audience be engaged. To practice, I recommend separating two types of gestures. One type is emphatic. It adds emphasis. What I'm doing right now is an emphatic gesture. But when I said separate, that's a descriptive gesture. And for those of you who are getting used to gesturing or challenging yourself to do more gesturing, focus on the descriptive gestures. It's almost like you're playing charades when you're speaking. If I said this is a big opportunity, I do big. I wouldn't say this is a big opportunity. So I use the key ideas and then I describe them with my hands as a way to get more comfortable speaking with gestures. And then I can move into the more emphatic gestures, which are not tied necessarily to any one specific word or phrase. So gesturing is important. Go beyond your shoulders, have a neutral resting place where everybody can see your hands, and then start with descriptive gestures, and it will help you on the path to being a better communicator and gesturing more broadly.
Great. I love those gestures, my gesture, but clearly I need to do a better job at that. So I'm going to go and practice. But I
Can
appreciate
I
you.
add one thing? One thing to add is recording yourself and watching is great. So when you say practice, part of how you practice is digitally record yourself. All of my MBA students have to watch their performances or presentations, and I make them watch them in three different ways. They have to watch without listening. And I make them watch at 2x speed because it exaggerates what they're doing. And many of my students sway when they speak. And when they're at 2x speed, they look like trees in the wind. So they really see it. And then I have them listen without watching, and you hear what your voice does. You hear those filler words. And then they watch together. It is painful to watch yourself. But let me tell you, you will learn a tremendous amount about yourself and you will be able to improve your communication by doing so.
That's awesome. I know my task. I'm going to rewatch this recording today.
There you go. You're doing a great job.
Great. Okay. So I think we're coming almost to the end and want to leave some time for audiences' questions as well, if there are any. But you have completed, and if our viewers here don't know this, you've completed 100 episodes of your podcast, which is awesome. Congratulations on the success.
Thank you so much. It's a team effort, and it's a true pleasure to do it.
I have been an eager fan of the podcast, and you would have noticed because I inserted a bunch of things that I've heard on your podcast, and I was like, oh, I'm going to ask Matt these questions. So I love all the interviews and all the guests you bring in. Something that you do really fun towards the end of each of your podcast episode is ask three prompt questions, the same prompts to each of your guests on communication advice. And now that I have the pleasure to interview you today and you're on the hot seat, I thought it'd be fun to put those questions back to you. How does that sound?
I am ready. I'll see if I can think fast and talk smart.
Okay, great. So I have my three prompts ready, or your three prompts that I'm reusing today. So the first one is, what is the best communication advice you've received, which can be translated into a 5 to 7 word presentation slide title? What would it be?
I've already shared it. It's tell the time, don't build the clock. And the reason that's so powerful is it's not only that it makes us concise, but in order to tell the time, you really have to understand your audience and their needs. So I'm actually sneaking in a second bit of advice there, which is to tell the time, you have to know your audience and what's important to them. So tell the time, don't build the clock.
That's awesome. I love your mother's advice there and how that's had a profound impact on you. Okay. The second one is, who is the communicator that you admire and why?
There are so many communicators that I admire. Some I've worked with, some I've just listened to. The person I use to answer this question is a young woman named Brittany Packnett. And I first discovered Brittany on YouTube through a talk she did. And I subsequently Googled her and have listened and learned a lot from her. She is an amazing speaker. She is incredibly confident and authentic, is very engaging, and has a very clear message. She talks a lot about confidence, which is something that's important to me. I focus on confidence in presenting and communicating. She talks about confidence more broadly. I encourage everybody to Google Brittany Packnett and see how good a speaker she is.
That's awesome. Okay, so I'm going to look up Brittany and then we move to our third prompt and final prompt, which is, what are the first three ingredients that go into a successful communication recipe?
Well, I gave you a little bit of a preview. You have to know your audience. We have to tailor our messages to the needs of the people we're communicating to. Second, we need to leverage structure. Rambling is not good, so have a structure. And then third, be engaging. Find ways to connect your content through relevance to your audience. So if we know our audience, we structure our message well, and we are engaging, we are increasing the likelihood that we will be successful in getting our points across.
Nice. I am sold, and that is some solid advice. Thank you so much, Matt. Let's move on to our audience questions. If we have any audience questions, you're putting them on the chat, and we have the first question. Any framework or tips on how to structure our message in everyday network events in order to be effective? Thank you, Deepika.
Oh, excellent question. So we're talking about small talk, chit chat, and I think small talk and chit chat gets a bad rep. We need to change. We need to rebrand it. I think really big things can happen during small talk. Let me give you a little bit of advice. First, another guest on my podcast, she's become a friend. Her name's Rachel Greenwald. She's a professional matchmaker and an academic. Really interesting. She has this great quote for small talk. The goal of small talk is to be interested, not interesting. And that's really, really important. We go into these small talk situations feeling this pressure, like, I've got to be engaging, I've got to be interesting. And that puts a lot of pressure on ourselves. Instead, just be interested, ask questions, highlight things that are in the environment. That's a good way to get people started. Many of us see these situations like a tennis match where I have to serve this great point over the net and it has to score. That's not the way to see small talk. Small talk is more like that game hacky sack where you have a little beanbag ball and you stand in a circle and you all kick it, and the whole goal is for it not to hit the ground. The only way you can be successful in that is if you set others up to easily kick the ball back to you. And the same is true in small talk. A very useful structure is my favorite structure in the world. And I know, Serbi, you know where I'm going because I always talk about this. It's three simple questions. What? So what? Now what? What is your idea, your product, your service? So what is why it's important? And now what is what you can do with it? In small talk, if somebody presents you with a question or starts on a topic, you can contribute to that conversation by saying what it is that's important to you, why it's important, and then you can talk about how you can use that information or ask others to comment on it. So what, now what is a structure for you to contribute. But if you're trying to get others to contribute, you can simply ask those questions of them. I could come up to you and say, what brings you here? And when you respond, I said, oh, tell me more about why that's important to you. And then I can say, what are you going to do next? So I can leverage what, so what, now what to respond as well as to initiate small talk.
Love it. As a program manager, I love structure. So I always follow your frameworks or try to. But thank you
Right.
with the what, so what, and now what. And also about the importance of small talks. I think it's super, super critical in building relationships. And as you mentioned, connection for better communication, right? Okay. Do we have more audience questions? Sally, any practical tips for how to stop speaking so quickly?
I do. Three things to think about. The rate with which we speak mirrors the rate we breathe. So if you can breathe lower and slower, you will speak slower. Second, we sync up our gesturing and our speaking rate. I will guarantee anybody who is a fast talker also gestures very quickly. It is easier for us to slow down our gestures, which in turn will slow down our rate. So you can either slow the gestures down or just make them bigger, which causes them to take longer. So the second way is to gesture more broadly or slowly. And then the third way is to remind yourself that often when you are communicating with some people who do not have the language you're speaking in as their native language. And we tend, when we speak to non-native speakers of the language we're speaking, to speak more slowly. So that's more of a mindset shift. Breathing and gesturing, those are physical things you can do. Just remind yourself that as part of your communication, you are likely talking to some people for whom the language you are speaking is not their native language, and going slower will help them to understand. Those three things often slow people down.
Great. That's awesome advice. Okay, we have our time for a last question before we wrap. From Dylan, speaking or presenting to an online audience, example, podcast or video call, can be uncomfortable because of the lack of audience participation or feedback. Matt, do you have tips for communicating effectively?
Oh, do I have tips, Dylan? Let me give you a few. So, first, we need to appear engaging ourselves. So, I want to give you three tips. So, when you're in the box, like I am here, you appear more engaging. First, fill half the screen with your body. Many people sit so far back, they look like a constellation. You need to fill the screen. I actually have a 4-finger rule. Before you join, you know how you see your image and then click join? Put 4 fingers above your head. It should only have 4 fingers of space between your head and the top of your box. If you're doing this, you're sitting too far away. Second, pull your shoulder blades down so you look broad. Many of us sit like this and we look cramped. And then finally, make sure that you have good lighting. So many people look like they're in the witness protection program when they do these kind of calls. So you have to look engaging, number one. Number two, to engage your audience, there are three primary ways to do it: physical, mental, and linguistic. Physical engagement, when virtual, get them doing something, have them clicking on reactions, have them typing into the chat, them doing breakout rooms. These are all things where your body goes, your brain will follow. You'll be more engaged. Cognitive involvement, ask questions. When you ask a question, people think of answers, even if they don't speak the answer. Use analogies, comparisons, a great way to get people thinking and engaged. And then linguistically, use people's names, that tends to draw people in, and use what I call time traveling language. I can use words or phrases like imagine or picture this or what if you could. And when I use that language, you actually see it in your mind's eye. So rather than me telling it to you, I ask you to envision it. And I can also take you into the past. I can say, remember when, think back to when. So through physical, mental, and linguistic engagement, you can pull your audience in, and then you have to present yourself in a way that's engaging to look at and listen to. That will help for sure.
Thank you for that very specific and actionable guidance. And Dylan, hope that helps as well. All right, that brings us to the end. Thank you so much, Matt, for coming here. It was truly a pleasure to moderate today's talk. And for everyone else, I would encourage you to check out Matt's awesome podcast. I was always a fan, Matt. I'm even a bigger fan now, and
Thank
definitely
you.
looking forward to reading your book as well. Thank you so much for coming out today.
Surbi, thank you. And thanks to the team behind the scenes that brought this about. I encourage everybody to work on their communication skills so we can all think faster and talk smarter.
Let's do it. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.